Hi everyone, welcome back for another video. I'm really excited because today I'm going to be talking about what I was taught about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints versus what was actually the truth about the church. And I'm excited for this because this topic is like one of the very first topics that I thought of when I first decided to start my channel. And I knew I couldn't just like jump in with it. So now I feel like I'm to a point where I can talk about it, and I'm excited because there's so much I feel like. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. The very first thing that I want to talk about, a few things about Joseph Smith. So when I first became a member of the church, we talked about the fact that he was the founder of the church, that he translated the golden plates into the Book of Mormon, that he had this first vision of Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, and they told him that none of the churches were true, so he should start the true church. And one of the main things that I really soaked in about Joseph Smith was the fact that he had one wife, Emma. And he loved her so much. The moment that he saw her, it was like he knew he loved her and he cherished her. They had children together. He only had the one wife. He did not practice polygamy. And that was not true. The actual truth is that he had multiple wives and he was practicing polygamy, but he was lying about it the whole time. He was marrying people behind Emma's back, and if I remember correctly, actually had a couple wives before he married Emma that Emma didn't know about, and then he was marrying them behind her back as well, even underage girls. So when I found that out, I was completely shocked because the Joseph Smith I knew had one wife that he loved and cherished and did not teach that polygamy was correct. And when polygamy was brought up in my lessons, I can remember the way they justified it was Heavenly Father allowed polygamy for a short amount of time because in those days men were scarce and women outnumbered the men, and the women needed to be protected because in those days women couldn't work, women couldn't pretty much survive on their own. They had to depend on a husband or a man. So that's why the church allowed polygamy, but Joseph Smith never practiced it himself. So when I found this out, I was so shocked because that was like one of the things that really drew me in because I didn't grow up around godly men. They were very worldly, very abusive, just very low vibrational, negative examples. And Joseph Smith was like this awesome person because he respected women and he had one wife that he loved and he never mistreated her. He was never abusive to her. And learning that he was the complete opposite of that, it was devastating. It really just it hurt so much because I was like, oh my gosh, I thought that, even though I never knew him, I feel like I knew him. So I was like, this is not the person that I thought I knew. This is, it was one of the main reasons why I believed the church was true because he preached the gospel and was so adamant about everything. And I was taught that he was faithful and he was a martyr. That just wasn't true. Everything was a lie. So that right there is the very first thing. Like one of the main things to me that just devastated me when I found out it wasn't true, especially because it was so far from what I was actually taught. Number two is that Joseph Smith was a martyr who died for his religious beliefs. Learning that he was so hated because of how convicted he was and how much he would not back down about his beliefs. It was so powerful, and it just made me believe in him and the church even more, because the only other person that really compared to that was Jesus Christ. He was killed for bringing the gospel, for trying to bring people closer to Heavenly Father, for spreading the truth. The actual reason that Joseph Smith was killed was because he was discovered for having multiple wives and practicing polygamy when he had been lying about it the whole entire time and saying that polygamy is not right. So he was about to be exposed in a newspaper. I think it was called the Expositor. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. But he was going to be exposed by someone who was in his presidency. I think it was Brother Law. I think it was Brother Law. And he was going to print in the paper about Joseph Smith having multiple wives and lying. So Joseph Smith pretty much had the newspaper deemed a public nuisance and destroyed the printing press. When it was found out by other people outside of Nauvoo who were not Mormon, because Joseph Smith, pretty much everyone in Nauvoo that he dealt with was Mormon, that were in the high authority positions. So he could pretty much do whatever he wanted because he ran the city. But people outside of Nauvoo were like, wait a minute. So all the stuff that was going to be printed about him was true. So he had this printing press destroyed, which was illegal because I think it was like against the First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech. So there were so many people that were mad at him. We had the printing press destroyed because it was going to expose him, not because it was a public nuisance. That's why he was killed. Not because he was a martyr and everyone hated him because of his religious beliefs, because he was so convicted in them. He was hated so much because of everything that he was doing. He was lying about what he was preaching about. He was living the complete opposite of it. So that's the real reason he was killed, not because he was a martyr. So the next thing kind of goes hand in hand with this. So I was taught that he was hated so much by everyone outside of the religion because of how strong his beliefs were and how much he wouldn't back down from them and how convicted he was in everything he was preaching. And that's not the real reason. The real reason was because he was lying and being a hypocrite, preaching that polygamy was wrong and the church didn't practice polygamy, but yet he was marrying all kinds of women. Not only just marrying women, but he was like marrying other men's wives. He would send these men off and then marry their wives while they were gone, and had declared himself king and said that nobody had done as much for mankind as him besides Jesus Christ. So he had himself like right up there with Jesus in his mind. So the next thing that I was taught about the church is that Joseph Smith had the first vision where he saw Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ next to each other when he was praying in a grove about which religion or which church to follow, and that this is a vision that he told everybody when he was first establishing the church. And it was really powerful, especially because the pamphlet that they presented it in, it made it seem so dramatic. And it was so powerful because it was like, wow, he actually saw God and Jesus Christ. Like that's a big deal, you know, for somebody to see God, a human, to see God on earth, you know, in a vision, and be told that all of the other religions, all the other churches were teaching the wrong thing, and that he needed to start the true church because everyone had pretty much destroyed the teachings of Jesus, and he needed to restore the true teachings of Jesus Christ. And the truth actually is that there were 7 versions of this first vision, of this vision that Joseph Smith had. And the version that they end up using is not even the first version. I don't remember what version it is, but it's not the first version that he said. He didn't even mention this vision until way after the church was established. So the fact that, first of all, it wasn't the only version and it wasn't a part of how the church actually came about, it didn't make sense when I found that out. I was just like, so that's a complete lie. So if that's a lie, then there are so many other lies because that's something major. And if that is being lied about, there's so many small things that have to be being lied about as well. And of course, there were. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the Relief Society. So I was taught that the Relief Society was an important part of the church and that it was established very, very early in the church, and pretty much it was like a backbone because without the church and the women coming together and them planning everything and supporting each other and helping to support others in the community that needed help and just all of their problem solving and everything that they did, like it was an important part of the church that had been established at the very beginning. And the actual truth is the church disbanded the Relief Society for some years. And it was disbanded after Joseph Smith was killed. And the church says that it was disbanded because after Emma had been okay with polygamy, when Joseph Smith had died, that she was using Relief Society to preach against polygamy and to preach against some of the stuff that Joseph had been preaching about when he was alive that she didn't agree with. And that's the reason why it was disbanded. But in reality, it was actually disbanded because Brigham Young pretty much blamed the women for Joseph being killed. Him blaming them was his reason for disbanding the Relief Society. And he pretty much said that no women were allowed to gather, no women were allowed to even be talking to each other in small groups, nothing. And he encouraged men to keep their wives at home because if it wasn't for the women not being faithful and preaching against Joseph Smith, that Joseph would still be alive. You think about it, the women were the scapegoat. And even though Emma was okay with Joseph Smith practicing polygamy, I think it's safe to say that she was not okay with him practicing polygamy if right after he passed away she was like adamantly preaching against it in Relief Society and felt like it was so wrong. That doesn't say that she was okay with it while he was alive. That says that she pretty much had to deal with it because he was going to do it no matter what. It was like, I think over 20 years the Relief Society was disbanded. And being a member of the Relief Society, it made me feel so important. It made me feel like I was a part of something. And to find out the reason that it was disbanded, or even that it was disbanded at all, I was like, wow. Another lie. Another lie about something so important. So important. And when I found out that, first of all, that it was disbanded, and second, that Brigham Young felt the way that he did about the Relief Society and the women, it really hurt because it's like finding out somebody who you think loves you and cherishes you is actually talking smack about you behind your back to other people and painting you in a bad light when to you they're presenting a completely different feeling towards you. So that was pretty hard when I found that out. But you get over it, right? So the next thing is about the temple. Actually, the last couple things are about the temple. So the first thing about the temple that when I learned about it, I was so excited was that when you go and you get your endowments, that you are given your unique name that Heavenly Father gave you in heaven before you came down to earth. And this name is unique to you. This is what He called you. Your husband was going to find out this name when you guys were sealed in the temple. Like, it was such a special, sacred thing. And you weren't supposed to tell anybody about this name because it was so sacred. And I was so excited to get my name. So excited. And the truth is that when you go to the temple, that day that you go, all the women that go on that same day, they all get the same name as you. All the men, they all get the same name. And the temple workers are taught, I don't know, some way to pick the name, and then they go with that name like all day. So I'm going to tell you now, my name that Heavenly Father supposedly gave me was Leah. So I wonder how many other how many other members were given the name Leah. So on this video, this is actually the first time I've ever said that name out loud. That's not my unique name. Leah. Leah. Why wouldn't it be Leia? But Leah. Okay. Anyways, it's a complete crock. So if anybody else has the name Leah that they were given at the temple, please comment and say that you were given that name too, because I just wonder how many more Leahs did Heavenly Father name? There's gotta be tons. We're twinning somewhere. Alright, so the last thing about the temple, which probably is the most important thing, is the ceremony itself. You know, I was taught that the ceremony was given to Joseph Smith by God Himself, and this was a ceremony that was necessary to get to the highest kingdom. And it was such a sacred place, and going to the temple, you were the closest that you could ever be to God here on earth, because that's where the veil was the thinnest, when you were in the celestial room. So it was like this big grand thing that's supposed to be so sacred to the church, and we're supposed to be so special because we're the only ones that have the temple. We're the only ones that have this ceremony. And we're so blessed to be able to have this ceremony, because we'll be able to make it back to heaven, to Heavenly Father, and live like next door to Him, pretty much, is what it felt like. In reality, Joseph Smith stole the ceremony from the Freemasons. Of anybody, the Freemasons. And he justified it because it was pointed out back then, like, the Freemasons, they did not like Joseph because they made him a Freemason. He saw the ceremony, and then all of a sudden, now he's got this ceremony in the temple that's pretty much that, except he changed a couple things and was like, well, this is the true ceremony. Y'all were doing it wrong. The ceremony, yes, it's God's ceremony, but the way that you're doing it is incorrect. And the way that I have is the way that God told me that we should actually be doing it. So our ceremony here in the temple is the most correct, and yours is wrong. Um, excuse me? You're going to steal something from somebody, change a couple things, and then say that the way they did it was wrong and yours is right because it was given to you by God. When the ceremony is supposed to have coming from God directly to you in the first place. Those are complete different ways of getting this ceremony. And you know which one actually sounds true? That he stole it because he became a Freemason. I mean, look at everything else he did. Completely lying about everything. And when I found this out, I was so mad because I learned about the Freemasons like a long time ago. And I didn't like the Freemasons. I felt like they were a satanic group. I knew they did all kinds of crazy stuff, ceremonies and whatnot. And it was very secretive. Like, I even had lived in an apartment that was a Freemason temple at one point, and I didn't know that when I moved in, but there was some, like, a whole cavity underneath that was completely boarded up, but you could, like, I don't know, it was creepy and it had weird vibes. It just, and everything I had learned about them before, I was so mad because not only had I done the ceremony so many times in the temple, but I was wearing the garments with the freaking Freemason symbols on them. Like the whole time. Oh my gosh. I was like, are you kidding me? When I found that out, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. And it was just like, this church is not true. And everything that I've ever felt bad for, unworthy for, anything that they've ever said to me, however they've made me feel, whatever they've done, it doesn't matter because all of this stuff is not true anyways. So, those are the things that I learned about the church as a convert that were actually not true. And some of them very major. Actually, all of them very major, because if any of this stuff I would have learned at the very beginning, if I would have known that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy, he was lying behind Emma's back. If I'd have known that the temple ceremony was taken from the Freemasons, if I would have known that this first vision wasn't actually a first vision and it wasn't true, like, there's just so many things. I would not have become a member. And I know there are so many other people who would not have become a member. And I feel bad for the people that grew up in the church because it's all they've ever known. So people who find out that have been in the church their whole entire lives, I imagine it must have felt so much more devastating than it did for me, because I had been a member for a decade, but I had also had a lot of life experience before that. And so many people have grown up in the church, and there are tons who are no longer members, and they've completely turned their back on any sort of faith, on any sort of belief, because of how badly they were burnt by learning that everything they were ever taught, anything that they ever practiced, the way that they were brought up was a complete lie. So we've come to the end of the video. Those are the things that I learned about the church that were actually not true. So I'm glad I was able to make this. I'm glad I was able to talk about it because I've been excited about it. And I'm also very excited about my next video. Now, my next video, you know, there's some people that might not view it the same as me. They might not like what I have to say, but it's my opinion and it's the way that I feel and how I think. My next video is going to be about how I think Joseph Smith was a narcissist. So join me on the next video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and come back for the next video. And remember, you are worthy, you are worth it, and you are loved unconditionally. Mwah. All right, bye, you guys.